WTF1 Post-Race Podcast.
Welcome to the WTF1 Post-Race Podcast, Spain edition. Exceeding track limits just because he could, sweat or rain. Another reason why being a Ferrari fan is the most painful thing on earth. And our Mercedes on the up. To dissect all things Spanish Grand Prix, where it was indeed Max Verstappen who took his 40th career win to absolutely no one's surprise, alongside myself, Harry Benjamin, is Callan O'Keeffe as always. And this week we're joined by prolific F1 content creator Antonia Rankin. But before we introduce Antonia and get into anything, Callan, would you like to let us know why you couldn't watch the Grand Prix live again?
Well, everyone knows, Harry, that racing drivers don't have great spatial awareness. And I took a bit of a detour on my way back from Thruxton and, planned on getting back as quickly as I could to watch the race. We had a couple of F4 drivers out. Took the detour, ended up going to make a U-turn because I didn't trust the sat-nav. And I got my road car beached trying to turn around. So I ended up trying to dig myself out for about 2 hours. Had to call a nice recovery person to come and get me. Full scale, jack the car up, wooden underneath. But it did give me a solid 2 hour period while I was waiting for them at 10 o'clock at night to watch the race. So I think it was just a blessing in disguise, really.
Yeah, and you made it in the end, and that's all that counts. You did send me a lovely video about you actually digging yourself out of the ditch, which I did find quite amusing.
We were in a forest, and I'm just happy I'm still here to tell the tale today. It was very scary. It was very traumatic. So thank you for caring. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you so much.
Right, enough of that. Shall we talk about the Grand Prix? Antonia, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Great to have you with us. I suppose we all knew Verstappen won. He's dominating the season. Yeah. Great stuff. What we might have been a bit surprised about, though, was the two Mercedes, both on the podium, Hamilton and Russell. After qualifying, Hamilton pretty down himself, saying, we're not even going to get through to Q3. Well, he was just lying, wasn't he?
Lying, maybe not, but a welcome surprise, I suppose, for the Mercedes boys. Yeah, the upgrades package in terms of race pace seems to have done them loads of favours. I mean, obviously, they brought it in Monaco, but it's never going to be representative on a circuit like that. And it is great to see them back fighting for places. I mean, it's been so long for them fighting and pushing and finally seeing some of the hard work pay off. It'd be great to actually see a more competitive championship in the next few races.
But are we actually...
Oh, gosh, have I just...
Don't say that. It's the hope that kills you. That's the problem. Week on week. And every time we always sit down before we start recording, we always go, well, what are we going to talk about now? And it would be, everyone wants to see it, don't we? We want to see someone take the fight to Max Verstappen, but he was so far out in front at one point. It was almost like he was in a different race, wasn't he?
I feel like he could have started on the wet tyre and still won the race. We're not looking at anybody challenging Max, I don't think. Antonio, I just don't think it's going to happen. Maybe, okay, we'll get a great battle for second, which I'm all for, because that's the one thing we can kind of hold on to at this stage. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe... Oh, sorry, go on, Antonio.
No, I mean, battles anywhere in the championship are great to see. It's so exciting to see at any stage, in the grid, drivers fighting it out, and it's really exciting. However, I really would love to see someone challenge Red Bull, just because I think a victory is so much sweeter when you've had to fight for it a little bit. I think, it's coming from Max himself. He's going to, at one point, start getting bored of having these victories upon victories upon victories where no one is challenging him, because obviously as a driver, you want to be able to showcase your skills, have a bit of nitty gritty at the wheel. And at the moment, he's just not having that.
Can we put together a challenge for Max Verstappen where we have to impede him the night before? So maybe we send him on a night out on the Saturday night and he's not allowed to sleep. Something along the lines just to make him a little bit more human, to make it more of a fight.
What about if he starts in a ditch to start with, has to dig himself out while everybody else goes,
there we go.
Gets into the car and then has to catch up?
No, to be fair, him starting on wets wouldn't be half bad, because then he'd get to a point in the race where he'd worn off all of the tread, and by lap 45 or so, he'd just be on slicks like everyone else, and he could work his way through the grid.
Yeah,
it'd be like a bingo card of challenges that we could put him through to prove you're the best of all time.
One
Oh,
of them he has to start on like the motorway outside the circuit. Then he has to drive his way through.
yeah.
Like depending on how much he wins by, it goes up and up and up every weekend in terms of difficulty. It's like playing an F1 game where you keep increasing the AI, isn't it? Like I think that's our only chance of making it a close fight finish.
As a racing driver, though, Callan, I mean, I don't know how many wins did you get in your career, but could you ever get
Not enough,
bored?
mate. Not
Not
enough.
enough, not enough for you, clearly. But can you get bored of winning and being so dominant? Because I mean, Verstappen was out there; he had no one else to fight with, and was even going for that fastest lap just because he could, exceeding the track limits. And even with a penalty, it wouldn't have done anything. He didn't care. The team were telling him to slow down, please. Don't go for it. Don't risk it. Stay within the white lines. Blah blah blah. But it didn't matter. He could have got 5 track limits penalties and still been in the lead.
I think you know, obviously I've never found myself in a position where I'm dominating Formula One. So it's
Not
very
yet.
difficult to
Not
talk.
yet. It's the very big trophy in the background you have.
Not yet. Yes, that unfortunately was a second place trophy. I got beaten by Charles Leclerc to a world championship, and I'm still not holding on to the grudgement from that 10 years later.
I mean, if there's anyone to get
Congratulations,
beaten
Charles.
by,
Well, you know, I like to look at that, and maybe he learned something that set him up to. Well, I was going to say set him up to succeed in Ferrari, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that point later on in the pod.
I think he learned from the wrong person.
Yeah, exactly. How many wins? Not enough. That's why I'm here. No, it kind of shows, doesn't it? Really, that when he celebrated, it wasn't like a big sort of like, oh my god, we won a race by a huge amount. It's just the norm for him now, and I don't think you ever get bored of dominating. But I think potentially, we keep hearing Max saying that he's not going to be in Formula One necessarily for as long as we all think, and I think you don't go looking for a battle because you want to win every race, you want to stick it on pole, you want to break records, but I think if it gets to a point where he's just dominating race after race after race after race, he probably will go find another challenge because a racing driver's career is not that long like any athlete. You only have a certain period of time, and you do want the good moments, the challenges. And if he feels like this is too easy for him, unless it changes, he'll probably go and challenge himself with something else. And maybe we see Max Verstappen to Le Mans, racing with Joss, or Max to the Indy 500 in the next few years. That would be cool. Alongside Formula One, he could miss a race and still win the championship, couldn't he?
It would be cool, to be fair, to see him completely dodge about 3 or 4 of the races. Just give us some excitement for a few and then come back and still win the championship. Because, it would be at no loss to him, to be honest, would it? But I mean, I think boredom is the wrong word. Maybe just losing the novelty of the win. I mean, we hear it in the radio messages. We always have, even when Lewis Hamilton was dominating, it would be more of a, oh, congrats, guys. Good work this weekend when he'd won, rather than, I guess, if it were this weekend, if he would have been absolutely feral on the radio. Like, it's not a case of being bored of dominating, because being the best of the pinnacle of motorsports, I don't think that ever can get boring. You're the best of the best of the best. However, there are no new challenges for him at the moment. And I think in terms of securing the longevity of his career, that could be the main barrier.
And we have seen it, haven't we? We've seen domination in the sport. Like, it's not a new thing to watch a driver dominate Formula One, is it? Because of the nature of the sport and how dependent we are on the cars. If you get an exceptional driver and an exceptional car, they will dominate. So, domination does come to an end, and it will happen eventually. We all know that one day we're going to be sat on the pod, hopefully before we're all in Zimmer frames, talking about the fact, maybe this is actually the start of so many challenges for Verstappen. And when that happens, it will be the start of a new reign of terror for someone else, won't it?
It will. Well, we can all but dream. But coming back to, I think the point that we started this on was the Mercedes, and on the podium, which is great for them. Before we move on to Ferrari, though, Callan, just on the Mercedes, it was a bit of a weird weekend for them, really. The qualifying incident that the two drivers had, Russell and Hamilton. What did you make of that? And also, the new upgrades that they brought in Monaco. This is really the first time they could have a proper go at it in Barcelona. But how track specific do you think that might be? Because they have so much running around this track, testing and previous racing and that kind of thing.
I think if there is a place where the upgrades are more specific, it is definitely Barcelona, because one of the great things about the circuit is that you have a really good mix of all different kinds of corners, lots of combination sections. So really, if a car's strong here, you see how strong it really is. It's not like a Monaco or a Baku, for example, where there's more to chance with track evolution being a street circuit and driver getting close to the wall. So I think actually we might be seeing Mercedes have made a bit of a step. We've seen the dominance of the Red Bull is extended here because the car is very, very good. But I think a double podium from Mercedes is a strong showing, and it wasn't like they qualified at the front and just stayed there. They actually worked their way through, didn't they? And I'm hoping that they kind of found the right direction now. Obviously, they've still got a long way to go to catch Red Bull, but it looks like it's the first step in closing the gap, isn't it? Red Bull's out in the distance, but they've taken the first step in trying to catch them. And going back to the qualifying incident, I think everyone at home was equally as confused as I was. It just seemed a bit clumsy, didn't it? It's not something you expect to see Formula One drivers doing, especially in qualifying, is it?
Not at all.
This show is brought to you by BetterHelp. How much time you spend on yourself in a given week versus how much time you spend on other people. It's so easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you and never take a moment to think about what you need from yourself. But when we spend all of our time giving, it can leave us feeling stretched thin and burned out. Therapy can give you the tools to find more balance in your life, so you can keep supporting others without leaving yourself behind. If you're thinking of starting therapy, why not give BetterHelp a try? It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/WTF1 today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/WTF1.
Well, it was good news for the Mercedes, and they jump Aston Martin in the constructors. We talked about Ferrari. Antonio, let's come on to them. Leclerc in particular, because Carlos Sainz, yeah, it was a solid race from him. I think he did the best he could in his Ferrari. Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, even with new upgrades that they brought, everyone talking about these new side pods that they've gone for a bit more Red Bully. He qualified 19th. Swore there was something wrong with the rear end of that car. The mechanics doing something, basically changed it all and put it back on again just to try and see if that might do it. It's basically, I think, like turning the computer on and off again. And let's see if that did anything, because they didn't come out with anything actually that was the problem. Started from the pit lane, and he didn't exactly carve his way through the field, and he left with no points. That's a disaster. What is going on?
Yeah, just a weekend of nothing for Ferrari. I was also underwhelmed by Sainz's performance, if I'm honest. I was hoping for a bit more from him, especially given that it's his home Grand Prix. I wanted him to do well. But no, I mean, Leclerc just wasn't anywhere this weekend. I would have at least thought he could have carved his way through up to, even just borderline out of the points, but he wasn't even close. I mean, the Ferrari just didn't seem responsive to the circuit whatsoever. There was something that just wasn't clicking this weekend. And I mean, quali, yeah, perhaps there was an issue for Charles. I don't doubt that at all. But in terms of actual race pace, that wasn't there either. Even against the slower opponents down towards the back of the field, there didn't seem to be any competitivity in any aspect at all. It wasn't even as though he was getting caught in DRS trains and couldn't, was just stuck behind cars that he couldn't pass. It was more the fact that he wasn't stuck. He just wasn't fast enough to pass them. So I think Ferrari really do need to go back to the drawing board big time, because Barcelona is a very representative circuit. That's why we have it as a testing circuit, because if you do well at Barcelona, you've got a good car. So I think Ferrari really have to sort something out, because this weekend was incredibly underwhelming from them.
I think one of the interesting things with how kind of Formula One teams bring upgrades, and it's not necessarily the same across the grid, but it tends to be the way that they do it is they tend to bring upgrades and put them on one car. Now, obviously, they want to correlate it. They have amazing facilities. They have all these things that say we should put this on the car because it's going to be quicker. And sometimes they just get it so wrong. And I wonder if part of the reason why Charles was having the struggle was maybe he had a part on the car that Carlos didn't, and it just really didn't correlate the way it did. It could also be down to terrible driver performance, but it wouldn't be the first time, certainly inside the sphere, we've heard a part going on the car and it's just not gelling with the rest of it. And then it almost making it feel like you've got a problem because you feel so disconnected from what's going on within the car. And then once that confidence is gone as a driver, that's it. There's no way you're going to push the car to the limits. We're looking for tenths of a second and your weekend just unravels. And it's really strange to see such a big split between Carlos and Charles, isn't it? I don't think we've ever really seen that since the two have been teammates. Well, not certainly in this direction anyway.
No, not at all. Well, they both did have the upgrades, I believe, and it was Leclerc who ran a sort of back-to-back. He didn't have it in FP1, and he had the upgraded side pods on FP2. Ferrari saying, Antonio, the upgrades weren't going to be night and day anyway, but clearly there's got to be some sort of long-term gain here, and they'll look at Mercedes and go, damn.
I don't know. I mean, with upgrades and performance, there's cause and effect there. You know, if there's an issue after putting the upgrade on, you can go, okay, well, the upgrade is the problem, and then you take it off and the problem's gone. I think a big issue actually in the race, as well as the fact that there was just no pace for Charles, was strategy, as per usual, unfortunately. I mean, the hard tyres weren't a responsive choice anyway. I mean, they weren't agreeing with a lot of members of the grid just because the track temperature wasn't as high as expected. It wasn't as abrasive as they were all expecting it to be. But they put Charles on the hards very early on and didn't then really give them a chance to work before immediately switching them out, thereby completely disregarding the potential benefits of having the hard tyres on early. But then in a second stint, the hard tyres performed really well on the car. It seemed like a bundled strategy from Ferrari. I mean, obviously they had nothing to lose this weekend, don't get me wrong. They could afford to make some risky calls and change things up a bit. But I think generally speaking, there was no maximization of any result whatsoever from them. But I mean, in comparison to Mercedes, the upgrades are very different. I mean, Mercedes, the chief aspect of their upgrades was probably in the front suspension with the retwiddling of the wishbones. But aside from that, I just think upgrades wise, Ferrari need to really have a look at what they're putting on their car and say, what we're working with isn't the best car on the grid anyway. Let's be very careful about how we go forwards because, yeah, if they're whacking something on the car and just hoping for the best, they do have a lot to lose here.
Yeah, and also you make a very interesting point about how upgrades can affect. It's like you put the upgrade on, it's not as good, you take it away. Well, what if that's just the driver's reaction to the upgrade? You know, you have two very different drivers, two very different driving styles. It again, and like I said earlier, they're looking for such small margins. If they can find half a tenth to a tenth in every corner, all of a sudden, a track like Barcelona, you're looking at a 1.5 second gain. Obviously, it's easy to say that sat here in a bedroom somewhere, not working on race cars, but it's not a big night and day difference, as you say, that can lead to a huge performance gain. So the whole like Formula One strategy of how you actually develop a race car is I think far more complex than people realize. And then you add the human aspect into it with a racing driver. And yeah, it makes it very, very difficult to know if actually you're on the right track sometimes, doesn't it?
Disaster, catastrophe. Those are the different kind of words that Leclerc was even describing it in different languages in his post-race interviews, and it's hard to disagree with them there. I'm sure. I wonder if Maranello will come out with some sort of statement this week to find an issue with that rear end of the car just to cover it off, or whether they will just say, look, there's bigger issues here for Leclerc and Ferrari, because it's not the first time he's had a tough weekend this year either. Well, those sort of the big hitters from the race. We had a lot of cars starting out position, really, didn't we? Which kind of allowed for some underdogs to come through. Once again, Yuki Tsunoda putting in a wonderful performance. I've not yet come across anybody who dislikes this man. But also Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo having a really good turn of performance as well. It was brilliant to see him up there. He had the better of Valtteri Bottas pretty much for the entire weekend. And I was really happy to see him score points. However, I wasn't happy to see Yuki Tsunoda up there in the points and then getting a penalty for this collision, or not really a collision, this incident where he was seen to have forced Zhou Guanyu off at turn 1, Antonia. What did you make of this incident? Do you think that penalty was really deserved?
Yes and no.
You'd be a terrible FIA steward.
Let's
I
sit
would.
on the fence. Sit on the fence.
I quite like the fence. The fence is comfy. No, yeah.
You can see both sides as well. It's
I
great.
I completely understand why the penalty was awarded, if I'm honest. There seemed to be a bit of a jerk. If you look at the onboards, you know, from Zhou's perspective, it looked like Yuki was about to whack into him. So Zhou took avoiding action and therefore was forced wide. However, being forced wide, not necessarily. There was space there. It was just that Zhou had taken the avoiding action and had to go off of track. So it was Joe's choice to go off of track, but in Joe's mind, he probably thought he was about to get boshed into. So, from Yuki's end, I would say, yeah, actually, there probably is a penalty there because there was a little bit of a jolt on the wheel, and Joe's thinking, okay, I'm about to get crashed into by Yuki in front of me, and that is, yeah, a penalty deserved. But I can see why Yuki's frustrated because there was space on the track. Joe just didn't use it, probably thinking, I need to save myself some car parts.
I think you've got to let them race. Like, if you actually look at the way the move was done, like the outside move at turn 1 and 2 in Barcelona, that's a staple move. That's a move that everyone's been doing since, like, if you're racing F4, you know that's a move that you can do. You slipstream up down the straight, you push them to the inside, last minute you pull out before the braking zone, and as long as you're ahead or alongside of the first apex, you have the position into the second one. And I'm going to say the other side of the fence. Hopefully, we can see this. I didn't think that Joe needed to go off. I think he had the space to execute it. And I think drivers now are so scared of making contact and getting a penalty or crashing that actually they'd rather just take avoiding action and let the FIA kind of deal with it and then come on the radio and go, oh, push me off. When actually, I think I personally, as a fan of the sport, would like to see drivers being allowed to race harder because the cars can take it a little bit more. And if there wasn't the option to bail out of it and go, oh, well, he forced me off track and get the other driver penalized, then Joe would have had to make the move stick himself. And I think that for me is kind of like it's been trickling down. It's more complicated now because we have the ability to just drive off track now in circuits. If there was gravel there, Joe wouldn't have gone off. Obviously, there's a safety aspect as well. I completely understand that. But I think it comes down from the stewarding side of things. I would like to see drivers being allowed to make a little bit of contact. It's not a demolition derby. I obviously understand that. But being able to force the issue a little bit more, to make moves stick, to be allowed to race rather than just coming on the radio and saying, oh, he pushed me off and the other driver getting penalised.
That's quite interesting, actually, because I think as well as the fear of being penalised is also the cost cap element, where in a team like an Alfa Romeo, if they were to sustain damage, that's going to be very costly. And obviously the team are not going to be very happy with them. I mean, just ask Mick Schumacher. But I mean, Joe
Meow.
was.
Yeah. No, bring him back into this space on that note. That's not the way we do things here.
I'm sorry. All due respect to Mick, but in the current era of F1, every single contact, every single mistake is so costly. So generally speaking, drivers are acting in abundances of caution. Yes, out of fear of being penalized, but also out of the fact that they probably don't want to cost their team hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of damage. So in a way, yeah, Joe, I definitely think could have stuck his elbows about, stuck on the track a bit, because again, the space was there. He could have made the move stick, and that would have then been on him to make it stick, and he couldn't have blamed Yuki to kind of get the easy pass per se. But yeah, I think maybe we could have a look in the future about to what extent are drivers actually able nowadays to fully race to the full limit of their abilities without having something in the back of their mind constantly being like, oh, you're going to get damage to the car, the team are going to get really mad at you, or you're going to get a penalty that you think is unfair. I mean, Yuki's probably in that position right now where he was like, well, I was just being defensive and I've been penalized.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about that is obviously drivers coming up through the ranks. When you're racing F4, F3, F2, like you're paying your way there. Most of them have sponsors or family money, whatever it is. But that fear of crash damages, it's actually not something new to them when they get to Formula One, because if you crash a Formula 2 car and you break a front wing, that's not a cheap day. You're talking tens of thousands of pounds if you do enough damage. So every time they take a risk when they're racing in the lower levels, and arguably, we've seen some junior series racing that's quite a lot more loose, let's call it, than Formula One, because they're young kids trying to prove themselves, trying to get to Formula One. So that kind of fear of what happens if it goes wrong, or if we crash, and the consequences of that, they're kind of used to racing with it as well. So, if there's stuff that we can do to level it out, maybe, because obviously, again, the pressure's not quite as much as when you have, a boss of Haas shouting at you, or a boss of Ferrari or someone like that, than just your dad or your sponsor. It's kind of one of those things that maybe we can use the podcast to inflict positive change. We need the people of WTF1 to get behind it and kick off every time there is an unfair penalty. It's a revolution. What do you think, Harry?
I sometimes do think you should run for Prime Minister or something. You've just got those slogans ready to go, haven't you? The positivity everywhere. I think, regardless of the penalty, I think I just wish a different penalty could have been applied where it didn't just drop him completely out of the points. Maybe in MotoGP, for instance, they have various different penalties where they either have to drop a second or 5 seconds while still racing, how they have to fully come off the gas, or that, simply Tsunoda might just have been told, right, let Zhou through and then have another crack at him, in the last 5 laps or something. At least then Yuki would have still been in the hunt for a point or two rather than coming away with absolutely nothing. And that's what grates me more, because especially in this 2023 scenario where the field is really quite tightly spread once you get Red Bull out of the equation, these teams, that the Alfa Romeos, the Alfa Tauris, the Hasses, where sometimes on the odd occasion they could come through and score a 6th place or a 7th place. That's not happening anymore, especially when no cars are retiring at the moment. And Tsunoda is case in point. Every result bar one before the Spanish Grand Prix, he was 10th or 11th. And in my opinion, the races where he scored points, he deserved more than just a single solitary point. That, I think there's a wider discussion there to have as well about should points be awarded further down the field. I think they should, but let's not get into that just yet. We can save that one for another day. But either way, I think we're all agreeing maybe the penalty was a little bit harsh. I don't think Callum's on the other side of the fence, but but we'll go with it.
I think the penalty was harsh, but I think it's more understanding the reason behind the penalty. I agree. I don't think.
But on the other side, good result for Zhou, though, right?
Oh yeah,
100%,
great to see him in
100%.
P9. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic.
And also nice to have the measure of Valtteri, like you said. I think that's the more important thing, to have the measure of Valtteri over the course of a weekend at a place that Valtteri knows really, really well.
Been on the podium before.
Exactly. It's a track where it's not necessarily down to something exceptional. It was just down to the job that he did. So let's keep an eye on how that battle develops over the course of the year.
Well, I completely agree with that. Let's keep an eye on that, because although Valtteri Bottas has been saying, I still think I've got a very long career in Formula One, I don't know about that at the moment. It's not looking great for the Finn if he carries on the way he's going. But that is a massive subject that we don't have time to get into, but we will. We have got a special podcast lined up for that later on in the season.
We'll get back to the show in a moment, but first a quick word about our partners at MoneyGram. We live in a world that's more digital than ever, with nearly every want or need just a tap away, and so many of our favourite digital services seamlessly meet the physical world when they're delivered to your front door. But until now, that hasn't been true for crypto. Digital currencies have been tied up online, with no easy way to bring them into the real world. That's why we're so excited to share that you can now cash in and out of select digital wallets and participate in MoneyGram locations without a bank, credit card, or debit card. Convert your digital currency to cash and back again using the only digital wallets with real cash access activated by MoneyGram. Learn more at moneygram.com/Stellar Wallets. That's moneygram.com/Stellar. That's STELLAR wallets.
Sweat or rain, Callan O'Keeffe? Have you ever confused the two?
I don't think that's something I ever had the problem with. Maybe I didn't quite work hard enough in a race car whenever I was driving one, but I've never confused the two because one's on the inside of the visor and the other one's on the outside. So I think it was probably just wishful thinking, wasn't it? More than anything else. You got a bit of speed. Max Verstappen's checked out into the distance, and you're thinking, oh, maybe we could have a bit of something. Maybe again, let's go for the extreme thing here. Maybe it was George trying to throw the other teams off. Imagine that.
I wouldn't rule that out.
Really?
You never know, do you?
Well, you never
Of course
know.
it will.
All of the radio messages are listened to by everyone. I'm not saying that he is malicious to that extent. However, he might not have been in a rush to correct his error once he realised. It would have had the other teams going, oh, really? And I wouldn't put it past any of the drivers to actually be like, hold on, I know it's my sweat now. I've realised my mistake, but let me just hold off on releasing that information just to make them sweat a bit.
But surely then other teams would have just asked, Ferrari to Carlos, is there rain in turn 5? And he would have just gone, no. Case in point,
I,
done.
I think George knows that F1 engineers, they're so obsessed with every detail, every little, and they react. How many times do we see F1 engineers just react to something that doesn't exist? And you're just like, mate, I'm not saying it actually, if it was the case, it's genius. The ability to be able to drive a race car and try and manipulate other teams' strategies whilst you're in the middle of your race by doing something as coy as that, brilliant. Maybe it was also he was just bored and he just missed his engineer. He wanted to have a chat with him. You never know.
The boy who cried rain
Yeah.
in the cockpit of that Mercedes. It was not rain, it was sweat. He got me so excited. I fully believed him. He convinced me because I suddenly thought, here we go. We can stop talking about tyre strategy now. We've got a bit of rain coming down. Let's get the inters on. Who's going to switch first? Come on. And it was all
Aston Martin entered the chat. They're like, finally, redemption. Redemption.
Oh, well, it wasn't a great weekend for Aston Martin in the end. That's a nice little segue, was it, Callan? I mean, it was all right, but a loss of performance, it seemed.
Yeah, it seemed like quite a complicated weekend. I mean, by contrast, Stroll actually had quite a good weekend for him, didn't he? I mean, he obviously running sort of closing towards the mid pack of the top 10, and he looked far more competitive than Fernando did. And Fernando had the late charge at the end of the race and brought himself back through, but not the race that Aston Martin have necessarily become accustomed to, and especially this year, is it? And there was so much hype, wasn't there, about Alonso going into this race? Everyone was dropping the same statistic about it. Fernando Alonso starting a third of the Formula One races ever.
Now hang on. You told me that before the weekend, and I was doing the commentary, and I didn't believe you at first because I was like, nah, I'm not going to say that. I don't want to risk it. And then it was doubly confirmed by F1 themselves. So well done, Callan, for coming up with that stat.
But it sounds ludicrous, doesn't it?
It's crazy.
Like, how can you contemplate that Fernando Alonso has started a third of the Formula One races there has ever been? That's madness.
He's
not
so
to be the party pooper, but there are more races, I guess, in recent seasons, aren't there? Not to ruin the really cool.
Well, if we're going to get picky about it,
yeah.
not to like poop the party, but it does. Think about it; it does make sense.
It does. I mean,
sorry. Continue to be excited. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I'll take my excitement elsewhere.
Does that rain in turn 5? No.
It's just sweat. It's just sweat.
Ridiculous.
I think the thing for me that I find really impressive is it's so hard to make a career in motorsport. It's so hard to survive in motorsport. And if you actually look back at what Fernando's achieved, I almost find it ludicrous that he's had a career as long as he has, but only won 2 World Championships. We're constantly talking about how Fernando's upping his game and how he's constantly getting better. And with 300 odd, I'm not very good at maths, so I don't know what a third of 1,086 races is. But it's 300. It's 300 races into his Formula One career, let alone his race career in general. And yeah, it's just impressive how he continually keeps getting better after all these years, isn't it? Am I allowed to be excited?
You are.
Yeah, you're allowed. I'm sorry.
I mean, 41 years old, Antonia. He's in the form of his life, I think it has to be said. Maybe not his best ever, but for what he's in a good space. He's finally made the right career move after so many bad ones. He's clearly got this sort of harmony with Lance Stroll, on the radio right at the very end. He could have overtaken Stroll. If Stroll was in a different car, he would have absolutely gone by him for 6th place. But, he knows who's paying him in the day, and it's Lance Stroll.
That Christmas bonus is going to be exceptional.
And Alonso doesn't need to overtake Stroll to prove that he's faster than him. No. He's clearly in a good place, which is nice to see. But, I mean, how long could Alonso go for?
Well, I'm going to put this out on the line. I've watched Alonso in F1 for my whole life, right? I mean, I don't remember his championships, given that I was 2 years old and 3 years old, respectively. However, I've grown up with this man in the sport being an absolute phenomenal driver. And, moving between the teams, obviously, I mean, he's played the field, really, proverbially, with the teams, hasn't he? But he's such a fantastic driver, and we've seen him take a couple of missteps. I mean, going back to McLaren, not the best, and him coming back with a winner's mentality back to Alpine a couple of years ago, and him genuinely not just coming back as, I'm bored in my retirement and I'm kind of good at this, let's just make some more money. He genuinely came back with an I'm going to win races and I'm still pushing for championships mentality, which as a just fan of the sport, it's fantastic. You know, seeing a driver who loves what he does so much and is so good at what he does, it's so great. And I'm such a huge fan of his. And I really, really cannot wait, because it is inevitable. There'll be a race win coming up. I can't wait for it. I will cry happy tears when that man is on the top step of the podium again. Because for someone to have a career as long as he has had, as successful as he has had, he deserves more. You're right. He does deserve more championships. Whether those are coming his way, maybe not. But I'd love to see him on the podium again, because he's blimming fantastic.
That's the excitement we're looking for. That's what we want to hear. There it is.
I think
Do you
a
want to
lot of
poop
people...
on my party now? Do you want to say that he sucks?
Yeah,
No.
He's past his prime. He should retire. Come on, he's done. He's done it.
It's just a fast car. If we put someone else in it, they'd win races.
I think it is exceptional, and I think it actually is a lovely kind of life lesson, really. But for Alonso, you know, you can have your down days, your down years, but you keep going, and it can suddenly all turn around. You just never know, and that's a nice little life lesson, I think, that Fernando Alonso provides us all. Well, he may be 41 years old and still going strong. Lewis Hamilton once said that he would probably not really race past 40, but it seems, Antonia, like the hunger is still there. Perhaps maybe it's been reignited by the fact that Mercedes had this sudden loss of performance. Rumours around a contract renewal with Mercedes and Toto Wolff have been building, especially in the last week. In fact, we're recording this on Monday, and an article came out yesterday which said that apparently, is he on the phone to you now? Lewis is on the phone. Apparently, an article saying that, well, today, Monday, could be the day that he signs on the dotted line for a contract renewal. Hamilton past his 40s into Formula One.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see it. Again, a driver that I've grown up watching, it would be fantastic. I mean, he's 38 years old now, getting towards the 40 barrier that he so clearly said he didn't want to pass. But I do think there's two ways of looking at the way his career has transpired. Firstly, that not winning the championship in Abu Dhabi 21 ensured he would stay, you know, beyond that, because I think he would have wanted to take his 8th and kind of pull a Nico Rosberg and go bye, you know. And that would have been his excuse to get out before 40 as the most successful racing car driver in F1 of all time, 8 world championships, and off he goes, you know, finish on a high. But also, I think it's great that we've seen this different side of him that we haven't seen in so many years, which is how much he wants to, you know, he drives like blimming God knows what. Even when he hasn't got the car beneath him, he has got so much fight in him to do well. And seeing him support George, I think he's been a fantastic mentor of sorts to George, because of course George has made the huge leap from Williams up to Mercedes in terms of performance. And it's so nice actually to see him fighting and pushing and, you know, being challenged a little bit, because it's really interesting to see how he responds to that after not really having to respond to that kind of thing for a long time. Obviously, I would love to see him get his 8th, just because I think it would be a fantastic accolade and a deserved accolade for a driver who has given so much to the sport and has been so successful. But yeah, no, I think nothing in F1 is deserved per se. Nothing is guaranteed. I would be interested to see how long this new contract lasts for. How long is he willing to lose for before he calls it a day?
And that is interesting as well, because obviously it's, you know, you've got George like well settled within the team now. At what point do they then say to him, well, it's time to try something different? Because if you know, Formula One is all about winning, and there's loyalties to drivers, especially, you know, Lewis has effectively made himself Mercedes, hasn't he? What happens if it gets to the point where he's not winning that 8th? At what point do you have the young drivers coming through who are dominating? You know, there's a few on the junior program who are doing a good job, who within the next few years will be knocking on the door. They're not going to get rid of Russell if he keeps performing, because he'll be the established driver. How long is that contract really going to last, and how long are they going to let him last for? And that's kind of the balance, isn't it? So should have answered that phone call to see if actually it was Toto. We could have asked him.
Well, let's wait and see what happens with Hamilton and that contract. Does sound like it is going to happen. Nothing confirmed at the time of recording, but I think we all wanting to see Lewis Hamilton continue to take the fight. He wants Mercedes to be back up there alongside and fighting with Red Bull for wins. So let's see what happens there. well, he was on the podium along with his teammate George Russell, but it was Verstappen on the top step. He extends his championship advantage even further after Sergio Perez can only do fourth. Let's do our own podium, though, shall we? Our WTF1 podium. So, from everybody, please, I would like your star performer, your worst performer, and your biggest surprise performer of the Grand Prix. And if you're watching or listening, do let us know your three as well, either in the YouTube comments or get in touch on the socials at WTF1. Antonia, you're the guest this week. You can take it away. Let's have your star performer first, please.
Okay, for my star performer, I would just like to query: does it have to be a driver, or can it be?
No, it doesn't actually.
No,
it doesn't.
No.
Okay,
There's
well,
no
in
rules
that
here.
case,
It's anarchy.
as I have learned. No, I would have to give it then to everyone at Mercedes for the upgrade package that they've put on that car. Both mechanically and aerodynamically, that car is hugely in a step forward than where it was. It's done a brilliant job this weekend in not necessarily closing the gap to Red Bull, but they're the same, if not better now than Aston Martin. And the car is looking very positive. So yeah, star performer Mercedes, because it's really great to see them finally making a big leap forwards.
Nice.
100% agree with that. I got to say, my star performer this week was the entire Mercedes Formula One team. They did a great job. Obviously, the step they took was huge. Not quite at the level to go and fight with Supermax yet, but again, a step in the right direction, and really impressive to see it with both cars as well. I think that's the thing that really stood out. So hopefully, step in the right direction to take in the fight to the Dutchman. What about yourself, Harry?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with all your points that you said there. I'm just going to be different just because. And my star performer has to be Max Verstappen. I think flawless, sublime. The only mistake he made was getting the track limits violations, and he knew he could get away with it. So I think we'll look back
Was
at
it
this.
really a mistake, though, or was it just a flex?
Probably
Was he
a
just
flex.
bored?
He was bored.
Exactly.
He was bored. But I think
Had he just been sat in a car for 2 hours
yeah,
and needed
exactly.
to stretch his legs?
We'll look back at this, I think, and go. I mean, even though it is a hugely dominant car, Max Verstappen will be one of the all-time greats of the list. 40 wins. I know there's a caveat. We have more races in a season now. We are having a period of dominance, but he's one short of Ayrton Senna. And that doesn't go. That can't go unnoticed and unrewarded. So, so Verstappen is my star performer. Okay, back to you, Antonia. Let's get your worst performer, please.
Mine's going to be Lando Norris / McLaren. It's really unfortunate because Lando's a driver that I really root for, especially, he had a taste of a really good car a couple of seasons ago, and it feels so cruelly stripped from him. But I mean, that McLaren was just nowhere this weekend. There was that little mistake at the start of the race. Again, it's a racing incident. I think Lando had to go for the position, and it was unfortunate that contact was made. But it stuck him plumb last, and he just made no progress from there. And it was a shame to see, but there was just no performance in that McLaren at all. So unfortunately, and I do mean unfortunately, unfortunately, Lando Norris.
Well, we could all say I would say honourable mention to McLaren and Lando. That was a very clumsy incident on lap one as well. I didn't even necessarily think he was going for the position. More, it was just he just ran into the back of him, didn't he? So he doesn't take it though. For me, unfortunately, I have to give it to Charles Leclerc. What a horrible weekend, as he would say, horrible. My French isn't very good, but or terrible. Really, really horrible weekend for him, one to forget. And I imagine he was on the first flight out of Spain that he possibly could be.
Yeah. I completely agree with everything on that. Leclerc is my worst performer of the Grand Prix. Let's go for our final step on the podium then. Our biggest surprise performer of the Grand Prix, Antonia.
Now, I could flip this and say I was surprised at how shocking Ferrari were. But
you could. Yeah, you could.
Unfortunately, I'm so used to being a Ferrari fan, I can no longer be surprised.
I'm so sorry.
It's not shocking,
So,
is it?
again, everyone's a Ferrari fan. It just cuts deep, doesn't it? But no, I'm going to give this one to Zhou. Really stellar performance from him to whack that car on P9. Well-deserved points. Some fantastic battles in the midfield, I think, that, in Barcelona, we weren't really talking about them earlier in the show, but I think, there were some really good fights going on. And, Zhou's been a great driver thus far, really deserved that P9. Good for him.
I think the survival of Toto Wolff's desk was also a big surprise. You know, whenever someone brings upgrades and there's hope, I was waiting to see the Mercedes going backwards and Toto Wolff angrily smashing the desk. But that for me again, honourable mention. You know, I do love those on this. But I agree. Zhao's drive was fantastic. You know, it was great to see him up the front. One slight error with taking the avoiding action with Yuki, but obviously I think that doesn't for me pepper what was a great weekend for him and a fantastic race for him.
Yeah, I wanted to say Zhou Guanyu as well, just because I really I love it when an underdog does well. Who doesn't, right? But I'm actually going to go for, because it was a surprise, Mercedes going into double podium, second and third. I mean, it sounds mad to go to the double podium, big surprise for Mercedes. What? But considering where they were in practice and qualifying, to get it together to come through for the race, I think, qualifying, obviously Hamilton was pretty good, but to come through for the race, I think was pretty good, and it was hard earned, I think, from both of them. So biggest surprise performers for me. Well done them. Let us know your three as well, as I said, in the comments or social media at WTF1. I think that just about does it for our post-race Spanish podcast. Thank you very much, Callan, as always, for turning up late. And Antonia Rankin, thank you very much for turning up early. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Hope you can come back at some stage too.
Balance. That's what it is. It's called balance.
Yin and yang. Just don't get stuck in a ditch next time. Thank you very much. I have been Harry Benjamin. Stay tuned to the WTF1 socials. Hot Takes Wednesday. It will be out on Wednesday. Shock horror. My mic moved. Apologies. What a way to end the show.
In Espanol, we say lo siento.
God, you're really multilingual today, aren't you?
What's goodbye in Spanish?
Adios.
Adios.
Hasta mañana. Hasta luego.
Well, do you want to take? Callan, you end the show then. Go on. Give us your best Spanish.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And until next time, hasta luego.
Lovely stuff. See you later.